Response to intervention, RTI, focuses on reading, writing, and math. We're going to go over the essential elements as it relates to reading, but note that it is an intervention or an identification related to all three of these areas. There are two general perceptions of RTI. Some see it as essentially an intervention program, a way to provide immediate help to avoid special education. That's how I tend to look at it. Some see it as it was originally conceived in IDEA 2004, as a way to identify students for special education services, students who had learning disabilities. Instead of a discrepancy model where they look for a discrepancy between IQ and achievement as measured by standardized tests, instead, students were identified for special education services based on how they responded to research-based instruction, RTI. Research-based, there's still a lot of discussion about what that is. There is not a universal agreement. But essentially, the basic elements is to identify students based on how they respond to research-based instruction. That is how some people perceive it. So it is an integrated assessment and intervention program. It provides that immediate intervention without having to go through the process of being identified. But then some see it as an assessment to assess to see if they need special education services. Immediate help for reading, writing, and math, all three of these. It provides that immediate help without students having to be formally identified. The key phrase is immediate. They don't have to be formally identified. You don't have to put no stinking labels on them. Students are identified then for help based on how they respond to research-based interventions, response to intervention. The interventions are used to assess. The intervention is the assessment. I know that gets a little confusing there. But again, the key point is this was originally designed to avoid special education, not to involve special education. Any RTI plan, if it's going to be used and utilized effectively, needs to be economical in terms of time and money, time especially for busy teachers. It needs to be practical and pragmatic, teacher-friendly. You can implement it without a lot of training and a lot of disruption to the classroom, and it needs to be effective. It's actually got to work. Now, RTI is flexible. There is a lot of variations in it. It is not a scripted, pre-scripted approach. The flexibility is its strength, so it should look different in every school. Excellent instruction first, and then an intense academic intervention. It calls for data-based decision-making. This means progress monitoring, decisions based on students' performance, but data-based decision-making also reflects or points to using research data to make decisions about what is in the intervention and how the intervention is constructed. Keep in mind, the goal of any intervention is to become obsolete. It's to create effective readers so they can create meaning with print, so you don't need any more gosh darn intervention. That is the goal. So let us look at the elements in Tier 1. Tier 1 intervention takes place within the general education classroom. It includes 3 elements, and we'll look at each one of those: high-quality classroom instruction, screening, and group interventions. Now, some people perceive Tier 1 as simply being high-quality classroom instruction for all students. Others see it as an intervention that takes place within the classroom. I've seen it interpreted and done both ways within school systems. So, high-quality classroom instruction, that refers to what is taught, how much it is taught, how it is taught, and by whom. Comprehensive reading instruction, effective classroom instruction for all students, all students should be comprised of these elements. There should be daily reading practice. Now, Nancy Atwell recommends, and others, that only 20 to 30% of reading class involves skills instruction. The other 70 to 80% be reading practice, self-selected reading. Students reading books at their independent level or below that they have selected. Effective classroom instruction for all students involves social interaction and conversations around good books. As a teacher, you need to structure these conversations. They need to be planned and purposeful, and there's a lot of ways to do that for all students. Effective reading instruction for all students needs to involve authentic writing experience. These are where students use writing to describe their experiences or their ideas. Authentic writing experiences meaning students are getting responses from other students and from the teacher instead of just correcting mistakes. And students are choosing the topics what they want to write about, and it involves teaching and utilizing the 5-step writing process. There are activities to develop all 3 cueing systems, not just the phonological cueing systems, but the syntactic, which is grammar or word order, and semantics, which is context or meaning. Effective reading instruction for all students has activities and explicit instruction related to word identification. And there are 4 strategies. Boys and girls, when you don't recognize a word, here is a strategy. It's called morphemic analysis. These are the steps. And comprehension instruction, meaning that you're teaching study skill strategies explicitly, and you're teaching and utilizing cognitive processes, higher level thinking processes related to effective comprehension. And there are activities to develop word knowledge or vocabulary. That includes wide reading, a lot of different pedagogical strategies as well to add to students' lexicon. Note that vocabulary worksheets have very little impact on students' vocabulary. This is what should be in effective classroom instruction for all. Any intervention should not replace that, but build upon that. It should look similar to this, so you do not have a splintered curriculum where students get this over here and that over there. It should be the same. There should be consistency. One should reinforce the other. There is screening in this tier 1. The initial screening is here. This is used to see if students are responding appropriately to instruction in the general ed curriculum, all right, before they experience failure in comparison to their peers, all right. You're screening for problems at the beginning, middle, and end of the year. So screening consists of 3 parts: establishing a baseline, setting goals or benchmarks, and monitoring progress. To establish a baseline, you want to establish students' current level of performance. So the measures that you use here needs to be simple, economic, and pragmatic, because here you're generally doing this with the whole class. So it's not very pragmatic or practical to do a lot of individual type of assessments here. So you'll want to keep it simple. I recommend using a maze of some sort. This can be done in large group. And remember, this is just one type of assessment. You're dipsticking, all right? One measure to see how they are responding. A maze uses a graded reader. You can get these on Ames Web or Reading A to Z or other things. You can buy official ones like that. This should give you the approximate reading grade level. You can create your own, or you can buy commercial ones. The type of measure you use here will affect the benchmark, so it's very important that you choose carefully here. The second part of screening is goals or benchmarks, where you'd like to see students be at various places in the year, 3 or 4 times during the year. Now, do not set benchmarks that are going to frustrate your student. They need to be achievable. If a student is in 5th grade reading at the 3rd grade level, it is not practical, pragmatic. It's even a little bit cruel to set a benchmark that students will be reading at grade level at the end of the year. All right, that would have the student jump up 2 grade levels in a single year. I don't think that's going to happen. Keep in mind that in any normal population, when we talk about at grade level, there will be 50% above average and 50% below average. All students will not read at grade level average. That is simply unrealistic to think of. That does not mean we do not set appropriate goals, but the goals must be within the zone of proximal development or within their ability to reach that goal. It must be achievable. In Tier 1, about 75 to 80% of your students are expected, this is just a ballpark, to be able to achieve that benchmark here. All right. This is why we need highly qualified teachers. This points as well to professional development for teachers. We cannot create a finished teaching product in 4 semesters of teacher preparation programs. We need continued and supported professional development for teachers. And to monitor progress. Tier 1 screening shows the students or identifies the students not making progress towards established benchmark, all right? So this should be about once a month at the least, every 2 weeks at the best. And again, progress monitoring needs to be simple, valid, and pragmatic. You need to test what you teach and teach what you test. It needs to reflect each other. Progress monitoring should address the 3 deficit areas: word identification, fluency, and comprehension. Possible assessment for Tier 1 running record. This is not as pragmatic because it needs to be done individually. Word ID test, and I'll show you that. Daily fluency scores, individual words per minute, or maze for comprehension. All right, here's a simple pre-post. Here's a pre-test. Give them the test of the word pattern that you'll be looking at for the next 2 weeks. And after the 2-week module or unit, then give them a post-test on the same word pattern or letter pattern. Here I am. Notice I have the words out of context, but also show them the words in the context of a sentence. Students simply identify the words. You mark the words that they identify and the words that they miss, pre-test and post-test. And there's an example of a maze. You can use that again for progress monitoring. Tier 1 group of interventions, in-class supplemental instruction. All right. It should be taught by the general education teacher. RTI is designed to be administered by general education teachers, but we know that teachers are still responsible for teaching everything else, all the students in their classroom. That's why it has to be pragmatic. So for the intervention in the classroom, I would recommend variations of the following 5 if you're going to do it separate from the general ed curriculum. If you're looking for an intervention that's done apart from the gen ed curriculum, in that in-class intervention, there should be daily sustained silent reading, daily writing, guided reading lessons that focus on word identification and comprehension, word work where you look at word parts, letter sounds, and patterns, and some sort of fluency work. These are the elements that I would recommend. And again, all tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, need to be coordinated with classroom instruction. All right, let's take a look at Tier 2. Students not making progress in Tier 1, not responding to the intervention, should be identified and put in a Tier 2. All right. Now, remember, this is a response to intervention, not a response to low test scores. I've seen schools where they use test scores to determine who goes into Tier 2. That is not response to intervention. It is a response to the intervention. Students not meeting the Tier 1 benchmarks go to Tier 2. Tier 2 is generally small group, anywhere from 5 to 8 students. It's outside the general education classroom. It can be multi-level, meaning you have grades 2 and 3 students, or grades 1, 2, or 2, 3 students together. And it needs to be conducted by a reading specialist or a highly qualified teacher of reading. Database decision making. This should be used throughout at all levels. And again, database decisions making means you make decisions based on the data you are collecting from your benchmarks and assessments, but also database meaning the research data used to design the intervention. Data needs to be collected at various points during the intervention to see if the gosh darn thing is working. It's used also to inform instruction. Okay, I see in fluency we're not making the progress. We need to do something a little bit different here. And data should be assessed on the 3 deficit areas: fluency, word identification, and comprehension. Tier 2 should be based on diagnostic data. We need to establish the cause of a reading difficulty. Now, again, there's 3 deficit areas: word identification, comprehension, and fluency. And again, RTI calls for database decision making. The first decision is what kind of instruction is needed. One size of intervention does not fit all. So the intervention must focus on students' deficit areas. All struggling readers are not the same. Some readers struggle in just one of these deficit areas, some 2, some all 3. Now, standardized test scores usually do not give us this information. They do not tell us the cause of the reading difficulties. They do not provide the data to make decisions about instruction. This tells me nothing. Complicated tests based on simplistic notions of reading, simply sounding out words. Again, this tells me nothing about the type of instruction. So what? What specifically should I do? And fancy graphs and charts are not, if they don't tell us the cause, the specific cause, and what to do, they are not of use. Now, I recommend an informal reading inventory, a diagnostic reading inventory, or a diagnostic reading assessment of some sort, qualitative reading inventory. These are all good. They can all be used. This will give you data on reading fluency, word identification, and comprehension. Diagnostic must identify the approximate reading level as well as strength and deficit areas. So any diagnostic measure must identify approximate reading grade level as well as strength and deficit areas. Now, we use reading level versus Lexile or percentile ranking when we identify reading levels. This enables us to make comparisons throughout the year and from year to year. And again, the 3 deficit areas, we must have information related to all 3. Targeted instruction then is instruction based on assessment data. That's why, again, it's so important to have good diagnostic data. I recommend a diagnostic reading inventory, again, informal reading inventory, or some form of assessment. Something like one of those should be used for a reading diagnostic. Target instruction based on that, as well as progress monitoring, should be based on the deficit area. The Tier 2 intervention needs to be intense and targeted. Intensity means more often in terms of instruction, smaller groups, and more time on task or engaged. Academic learning time is the time in which they are engaged in authentic reading and writing activities. Anywhere from 20 to 50 minutes a day, a minimum of 3 days a week, but 3 to 5 days a week. And again, RTI is flexible. It should be pragmatic. Use it in a way that works best for your school and your students. It needs to be sufficiently long to assess the impact. Usually it takes 4 to 8 weeks to see if the intervention, if there is working. And the assessment can occur individually, in pairs, or in small groups, as well as the intervention can be individually, pairs, or in small groups, not the assessment, but this intervention. And we have a lot of different activities. I recommend short, briskly paced with P&P time between, pause and process between activities. Effective intervention for students should not replace good classroom instruction, it should enhance it. And it would look something like this. It should contain these elements. An intervention should have writing in it of some sort. Now, these are short activities, 3 to 6 minutes in duration. Writing does not have to be long. But reading and writing strengthen each other, develop the syntactic cueing system. You can create writing prompts that reinforce letter patterns, word families, or sight words. And language experience activities where students are talking, you are dictating what they say, you practice, you use analytic phonics. That is a type of writing. And again, 3 to 10 minutes a day. These are briskly paced with pause and process time between. If word identification is a deficit area, there should be word work of some sort. Large unit phonics, where you're looking at letter patterns or word families. Analytic phonics, where you're analyzing words that are there, that they know. Boys and girls, find the word with the a sound. Find the word that ends with the k sound. And synthetic phonics, where they put letter sounds together to create words. Large unit phonics involves word building, onset rhymes, but also word sorts and word discrimination activities. And you want these to be in a meaningful context to the greatest extent possible. And you can design word work to reinforce word identification strategies. Cloze and maze activities. These are used to develop students' ability to use context or the semantic cueing system. And if fluency is an issue, there should be some sort of fluency activities. Repeated reading activities, there's a variety of them that you can use, as well as scaffolded oral reading, which is similar to the neurological impress method. Here is short passage fluency. I like this for low-level readers who sometimes get overwhelmed if they're asked to read for a minute. Here I have students read a 30, 40, 50, or even 60 word passage for older students, and I time their 3 attempts, and they can see, here's an example, see their scores getting faster each time, and they record that on a graph. This is called short passage fluency. And again, this is one type of repeated reading activity. And in intervention, there should be activities to develop cognitive processes related to comprehension and high-level thinking. Intervention should not simply be low-level skills instruction or phonics instruction. And of course, self-selected reading practice. And this can be short. Remember, your interventions are 20 to 50 minutes. So self-selected reading practice could mean 5 minutes of reading at the end of the intervention. Or maybe you'll have 3 days of focused instruction, and on the 4th day, it's reading practice. But students need to immerse themselves and read in an area that they are interested in to help them develop expertise and build conceptual and vocabulary knowledge to enable them to read. Practice facilitates word reading accuracy and comprehension, and we want students to be able to read at their independent level or below. So that means using high-low books, high interest, low reading level, and high, very low books, books that are picture-driven. Ways to assess, of course, fluency words per minute. Pre-post, we talked about that. Can do grade level running record for word identification, and that is individually given. Maze for comprehension. These are all ways to assess in Tier 2. For comprehension, I like using story retelling charts. This is a validated way to assess comprehension. Every assessment has its strengths and weaknesses, by the way. And then Tier 3. Students not making adequate progress in Tier 2, then they go to Tier 3. Tier 3 should build upon Tier 2 and be more intense and more targeted on that deficit area. And again, designed to meet the specific needs. That's why we have to have that diagnostic data, and we have to be recording assessment related to the 3 deficit areas: word identification, comprehension, and fluency. All right. The difference between tier 2 and 3 is time and intensity. I recommend 40 to 50 minutes every day. Now remember, students do not need to be formally identified here. This is not and should not be special education. Remember, this is designed to avoid special education. And special education teachers are often not reading specialists. Reading specialists, we need the most highly qualified teachers working with our struggling readers. If the student is not making progress in Tier 3, then they're referred to comprehensive evaluation to assess their eligibility for special education. Tier 3 is not designed to be special education. We sometimes get that mixed up. Now, the International Reading Association, it's called the Literacy Association now, said that in a school, the literacy and reading specialists should be providing leadership in every aspect of RTI. That means the reading specialist, the literacy, whoever it is, that person should be making decisions, not the special education teacher. We need the expert reading teachers. And as well, there has to be continued planning, coordination, communication between all parties. The gen ed teacher, the reading specialist, who's ever doing the instruction, all right, the tiered instruction, and eventually the special education teacher. The whole purpose of RTI is to avoid special education. To be successful, any plan, and it looks different in every school, has to be economical, practical, and effective.